Hey guys, I'm Johnny FD, and I want to share with you why every single person should start thinking about how to make passive income 4.0. And what does that mean? That means making money from investments. So whether you have zero in savings, you're in debt right now, or you actually have money to invest, I want you to start thinking about it. And these are lessons that I learned from reading Rich Dad Poor Dad almost 10 years ago. And I honestly didn't think I would ever be able to start investing money. But now that I have broken through that kind of limiting belief, I realize this should have been on my radar from day one. This should have been a goal. So even if you can't afford to actually invest yet, I want you to have this to be a goal. And I just wrote a big blog post about why, and I linked it with all my book recommendations, including Rich Dad Poor Dad, the Cashflow Quadrant, and even playing the board game Cashflow 101. I also mentioned I don't like any of Robert Kiyosaki's new stuff, so I wouldn't recommend his Rich Dad Education or Rich Dad Academy, which seems more like a hard-selling kind of thing that I think he licensed his name to. You're not even going to really see him part of it. But anyways, we can learn a ton from his actual foundational books, which is Rich Dad Poor Dad or Cashflow Quadrant. So if you haven't read those books yet, I highly encourage you to read it. There will be links to them in this blog post, which I'll link below this video as well. But here's the summary. So there are 4 quadrants of how you make money. The first is employee. And this is where most of us either start or most of us were at before we became location dependent. So if you aren't location dependent yet, you're not a digital nomad, you're not traveling around, you're probably an employee, you probably work somewhere. And this was my job back home as well. So the good things about being an employee is it's relatively stable. We get a monthly paycheck. And what's nice about this is you can save by having fixed expenses. You know exactly how much you're going to get paid every month. So even if you're in the employee category, I want you to start investing your money today and really just start now by cutting expenses. And I'll get into more of that later. But most of us as either digital nomads or location independent entrepreneurs, as I prefer to be called, most of us are self-employed. And either that means we are a freelancer, so we're working on our own budget, our own hours, or we own a small business. And that can be anything from owning a dropshipping store to an Amazon FBA business or a Kindle publishing business or whatever it is. I've interviewed now over 150 people on the Travel Like a Boss podcast, where we go over all these different types of location independent businesses. So if you're not really sure what type of business you can start while living abroad, either in Thailand or here in Europe, on the Canary Islands, or wherever you are, take a listen to the podcast. It's free. And I've interviewed now, I think 170 different people. So it's pretty wild. But the next step is big business. And the difference between a small business and a big business is actually huge. I didn't realize this until I really looked it up, because I had a small business. I had a couple employees, one for my dropshipping store to fulfill orders, another person to handle phone calls and customer service, things like that. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely customer service. I'm definitely a small business, but what if I have 20 employees? Would I be a big business? And the answer is no. A big business is actually someone with 500 plus employees. And sometimes you can still be considered a small business even with 1,000 employees. And it's pretty crazy. But I don't think any of us are wanting that route, because that means you have a board of directors, you have a big corporate office, and you're probably stuck somewhere. And that doesn't mean you can't make a lot of money, but that's probably not my audience. And people who value freedom, location dependence, to be able to travel and be able to take a break and really go in the 4-hour work week maintenance mode for months at a time. So we're just going to completely skip that. And what's great is you can go from self-employed to investor, and you can actually go from employee to investor as well. And here's how you do it. So the reason why I like location arbitrage so much and being location dependent is, if it wasn't for the fact that I was living very cheaply in Thailand while building my first businesses, I never would have had the money to invest. Even 3 years ago, when I wasn't making that much money yet, I was only making a couple $1,000s a month. But unlike living in California, where it's expensive, and spending $1,000 a month on my rent, and then another $500 a month on car payment, insurance, gas bills, and things like that, and then also spending money on just buying stuff, buying things. I talk about retail therapy and why we shop so much, why we spend so much time in malls, living back home, whether you're in Johannesburg, South Africa, or you're in California or New York, or expensive parts of Europe, we feel like we need to shop because we work these jobs that we don't necessarily love and there's nothing else to do on weekends. So then we just buy all the stuff. And by saving even, $20 or $40 every couple of days by not buying stuff, that really adds up. So if you're thinking, hey, I don't have enough money to invest, guess what? I did some math for you guys. And if you just don't buy those $20 items all the time, you can save $14,000 a year, which really, really, really adds up. And read this article for more information on that. But basically, if you don't believe me, go around your house, pick up things that you don't really use that often, and just be honest with yourself. Say, how much did I spend on this? How much did I pay for this? And then if I could have 100% of that value back right now, would I do it? Whether it's a shirt that you spent, even $20 on that you probably don't wear, if you can have that $20 back, would you have done it? And the thing is, if you'd rather have the cash for it, it probably wasn't a good value. It wasn't a good investment. So other ways to invest, save money by being location dependent is the money you save on housing, transport. When I live in Thailand, I walk everywhere, or I take a cheap, $2 Uber ride somewhere. Even when I'm in like Poland or here the Canary Islands, taxis are cheap, bicycles are actually free, and you can walk everywhere. So I'm saving a ton of money on transport by only spending $20 or $30 a month on the occasional Uber or cab while I walk everywhere else. I save $200 a month on just not buying stuff, not shopping as much, not buying things, because I have a luggage that I can't go over the weight, so I just can't buy that much stuff. And then $100 a month on other just kind of miscellaneous things, like I don't need as much insurance when I'm living abroad as you do back home. You don't get like parking tickets. You don't get the other random things, and that really adds up. That ends up being $15,000 a year in just savings from not living back home. And in 5 years, that's $95,000 if you compound the interest. So think about that. If you don't have $95,000 in investments or in your savings right now, you could have, if you just had lived somewhere cheaper like Thailand or here the Canary Islands even, or any of these other places that we talk about in this location dependent movement. And that's a lot of money. And what's amazing about that is by having that 95K in investments, as long as you don't touch it, you don't take that money out, that money doubles every 10 years. So even if you go back to your normal life after 5 years, you still have close to 100 grand just making you money. And that is why it's so powerful. So if you want to know more about what I actually invest in, take a listen to episode 74 of the Invest Like a Boss podcast. It's free. You can listen to it on your phone. You can play it here on YouTube or really wherever you want. But here's kind of just a sneak peek of everything that we talked about in my Q3 update, which is basically me and my co-host Sam Marks. Every quarter, we just sit down and we just openly talk about everything we invest in. And here are screenshots of what I invest in with Vanguard index funds, whether it's Wealthfront or directly through Vanguard, through real estate. And these are all properties I actually have partial ownership in. These are apartment buildings, and I don't have to deal with the day-to-day plumbing or collecting rent or an eviction because I use services like Fundrise, which does it for you. And I have money in peer-to-peer real estate-backed loans with things like Peer Street, where I get 8 to 10% interest on loans that are backed by real estate. So if they stop paying, we get the house and we actually get our money back after they sell it, which is amazing. So there's all these alternative investments, things like Bitcoin or Ether or FX trading that I put up to 10% of my money in because I'm young, I don't have any big expenses, and I can gamble it. So if you want to know more, take a look at this blog post, and I take a listen to the podcast as well. If you have any questions, let me know. But really, the point of this video was I want everyone to start thinking about passive income 4.0, which isn't just making money through your website or blog anymore, even though it's great to have things like that. I want you to start thinking about being an investor like Robert Kiyosaki in Rich Dad Poor Dad described. If you have any questions, let me know below in the comments. I'm happy to help. See ya.